Princess Liara of the Valari Empire had always lived in a world of light and wonder. The towers of her palace shimmered like glass under the twin suns, and the air was filled with soft hums of energy that kept the city alive. From the moment she was born, Liara's life had been carefully arranged, every moment guided by the traditions of her people. She was a princess, the jewel of her race, destined to uphold the honor of her ancestors. Every smile she gave, every movement she made, had been polished to perfection by tutors, elders, and the weight of centuries-old expectations. Yet inside her heart, Liara had longed for something beyond duty. She longed for freedom, for love that was her own choice, not dictated by ancient laws written by those who never knew her. The promise had been made long before Liara had drawn her first breath. The Valari Empire had bound itself to another great power, a neighboring alien civilization, in a marriage that would secure peace and strengthen alliances. It was said that the child born from this union would carry the hope of generations. Liara had imagined it countless times, a tall, elegant prince or a strong, heroic warrior, someone who would match her in skill, in intellect, and in presence. She pictured a being as regal as herself, someone who could command armies, navigate court intrigues, and understand the complex dances of Valari culture without hesitation. But destiny, it seemed, had its own strange sense of humor. The day the council revealed her intended groom, Liara's world shifted in an instant. She had prepared herself to meet an alien prince, someone familiar in form and thought. Yet before her stood a human, a fragile-looking young man from Earth, whose features were soft, untrained in the ways of alien nobility. His eyes were wide with awe and fear, his uniform plain compared to the ornate garb of the Valari elite. He looked at her, and in that moment Liara felt a curious mixture of shock, disbelief, and something she could not name. Humans were considered simple, almost primitive by her people. How could such a being be chosen for a union meant to shape the future of her empire? The council spoke with grave faces. "Princess Liara, this is Ethan. He has been selected as your mate according to the ancient promise. He is a representative of his species and carries the honor of their world. You are to accept him as tradition demands." Liara's mind raced. She had read about humans in the old archives, creatures of flesh and bone, weaker than her people, lacking energy manipulation and telepathic abilities that were common among the Valari. Yet standing there, Ethan held his head high, though trembling, and bowed with what she would later recognize as courage. Liara's first instinct was disbelief. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her mind spinning with questions. Could she truly share her life with this human? Could she love him or even respect him? She wanted to reject him outright, to demand that the council reconsider, but a small, quiet voice inside whispered that perhaps in this fragile human, there was something beyond her understanding, something that might surprise her. For the first time in her life, Liara felt a flicker of uncertainty. She had trained to follow orders, to maintain her poise, and to perform the duties expected of a Valari princess. Yet looking at Ethan, she sensed a kind of raw honesty, a heart unshaped by politics or fear, that no alien warrior or prince had ever shown her. His fear was real, but so was his determination. He had crossed the stars to arrive at her palace, not knowing what awaited him, and yet he faced it without complaint. There was a strange dignity in his simplicity, a courage that was not taught but lived. As the council spoke on, detailing the ceremony, the traditions, and the laws she was to uphold, Liara found her mind wandering. She imagined teaching him the ways of her people, correcting his mistakes, watching him stumble and try again. She imagined moments of laughter, moments of frustration, and perhaps moments where they would understand each other beyond duty. For the first time, she felt a twinge of curiosity about the human who would become her future. Liara had been promised a life of luxury, of control, and of political importance. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she realized that life had promised her something different this time. Something uncertain, something fragile, and yet something that might touch her heart in ways she had never expected. And though she could not yet admit it, a small part of her wondered if this human, so unlike any being she had known, could teach her what it truly meant to choose love, rather than follow duty. The morning of their first meeting arrived with golden light spilling over the crystal towers of the Valari Palace. Princess Liara had prepared herself in the grand hall, her gown shimmering with threads of energy that reflected the twin suns. Her heart, however, was restless. She had spent years imagining this day, meeting the being who would be her future mate, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of a human standing before her. Ethan entered the hall with cautious steps, his human gait stiff and uncertain amidst the gliding, graceful movements of the Valari nobles. Every eye turned to him, some curious, some skeptical. He paused, taking in the enormity of the chamber, the floating lanterns casting a soft glow, the intricate patterns etched into the walls, and finally, he looked at her. His green eyes were wide, reflecting awe and something else, nervous courage. He bowed awkwardly, not with the elegance of a trained alien noble, but with a sincerity that could not be taught. "Princess Liara," he said, his voice steady despite the quiver in his hands. "It is an honor to meet you." Liara studied him silently, her sharp violet eyes analyzing every detail. His skin was pale compared to her golden-toned Valari complexion, his hair a messy brown, his uniform plain and functional. He seemed fragile, almost delicate, yet there was a quiet strength in his stance, a determination she could not ignore. She had been trained to expect perfection from her future mate. But here was something different, human imperfection, yet unyielding courage. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his greeting without a word. For a moment there was a stillness in the hall, a silence that seemed to stretch longer than it should. The Valari nobles whispered among themselves, exchanging glances. None had seen a human so close before, especially not in such a sacred official space. Ethan swallowed hard and took another careful step forward. "I know I am different," he admitted, his voice soft. "I do not know your ways, and I may never understand them fully. But I will try, Princess. I promise I will try to honor you and your people." Liara felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. No alien before him had ever spoken with such honesty. They would have flaunted their knowledge, their superiority, their power. But this human spoke with humility, admitting his limitations yet promising effort. It was a strange, almost foreign concept to her, and yet it intrigued her. The council cleared the hall, leaving them alone for a moment. Liara took a deliberate step closer, keeping her expression neutral though her heart was racing. "You will have to learn quickly," she said, her tone cool but not unkind. "The rituals, the dances, the words, they are unforgiving. One misstep could dishonor both yourself and me." Ethan nodded, a small determined smile on his face. "I understand. I will do everything I can to learn, Princess. I won't let you down." Liara's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but she forced herself to remain composed. His courage was admirable, yet she reminded herself that he was human and humans were fragile. They lacked the endurance, the energy control, and the instincts that even the weakest Valari possessed. She was trained to see him as a tool, a political necessity, not a potential partner. And yet, looking at him, she felt curiosity creeping where it should not. Over the next few hours, she began the first lessons in Valari etiquette. She demonstrated the proper bows, the hand gestures, the ceremonial phrases. Ethan stumbled, mispronouncing words and clumsily mimicking her movements. Other humans would have become embarrassed, shy, or frustrated. But Ethan laughed softly, brushing off his mistakes and trying again. Each time he failed, he rose with determination, never letting discouragement take hold. Liara watched him, a strange sense of admiration growing in her chest. She had been promised a life of duty, of obedience, of perfection. But here was someone willing to stumble, to learn, and to rise again. His humanity, once a source of doubt, now seemed like a quiet strength. By the time the sun began to set, painting the palace in shades of gold and rose, Liara realized something she had never expected. She was not just observing a human trying to survive in her world. She was witnessing the first sparks of connection, the beginning of understanding that might one day grow into something far more powerful than duty or tradition. And for the first time, Princess Liara felt that the future, uncertain as it was, held a promise of its own, one that might teach her the meaning of courage, loyalty, and perhaps even love. Days passed in the Valari Palace, each one filled with lessons, ceremonies, and careful observation. Princess Liara watched Ethan closely, her mind constantly torn between duty and something she could not yet name. The human struggled with every tradition, every word, every gesture. He stumbled over phrases. His hands fumbled with intricate patterns, and he often tripped over the delicate floors. And yet he never gave up. Liara had always believed that strength was defined by skill, perfection, and power. She had been taught to admire the swift, the flawless, the superior. But Ethan was different. He was weak in ways her people would have dismissed, yet he possessed a resilience that no Valari had ever shown her. When he fell, he rose again. When he failed, he tried again. And when he faltered, he did so with honesty, never hiding his mistakes behind arrogance or pride. At first, Liara found his imperfections frustrating. How could someone so human, so fragile, ever fulfill the role expected of a Valari princess's mate? She scolded him silently during lessons, corrected his every error, and sometimes left him struggling alone when he could not meet her expectations. But beneath her strict exterior, a part of her was quietly impressed. She realized that no alien she had ever met possessed the kind of unwavering determination this human carried in his heart. One evening, the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace gardens. Liara walked alone along the paths lined with luminous flowers, her mind heavy with thoughts. She had requested Ethan join her, though she did not know why. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the strange pull she felt toward him, a pull she did not understand and could not ignore. Ethan approached cautiously, his footsteps careful, yet his green eyes met hers with unspoken questions. "Princess," he said softly, "you asked me to come?" Liara nodded, her usual poise intact, though her chest fluttered unexpectedly. "Yes, I want you to see the gardens at sunset. It is a tradition to walk here in contemplation. Perhaps you will understand a little more of our world." Ethan's lips curved into a small, tentative smile. "I would like that." As they walked, the soft glow of the flowers illuminated Ethan's human features, making him seem almost fragile against the alien beauty of the gardens. Liara felt a strange sensation in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that made her pulse quicken. She tried to dismiss it, reminding herself that he was human, a simple creature incapable of matching her in strength, intelligence, or skill, and yet she could not stop watching him. "You are very different from what I imagined," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "I expected someone. Powerful, skilled, flawless. I did not expect this." She gestured vaguely at him. "You." Ethan stopped walking and looked at her, not with hurt, but with honesty. "I am not perfect," he said softly. "I know that. But I can promise you this, I will never stop trying. Not for the traditions, not for the council, but for you, Princess Liara. If you let me." Liara's heart skipped. The words were simple, almost naive, yet they carried a weight that struck her deeply. No Valari prince had ever spoken like this, admitting weakness but offering commitment. She wanted to be annoyed, to scold him for presumption, but instead she felt a pull toward him she could not explain. The rest of the evening passed in silence, yet the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding, the beginning of trust forming between two very different beings. Liara realized that perhaps strength was not only in perfection or skill. Perhaps it could also be in persistence, in honesty, in the courage to face a world that did not understand you, and still rise. That night, as she returned to her chambers, Liara's thoughts were restless. Duty still weighed heavily on her, but for the first time, a flicker of something new had entered her heart. She could not yet name it, fear, curiosity, admiration, or something closer to hope. But she knew one thing: the human who was meant to be her mate was not what she expected. And perhaps, just perhaps, that difference might change everything. The palace had become both a classroom and a battlefield. Each day, Princess Liara taught Ethan the ways of the Valari, rituals, dances, greetings, even the subtle language of gestures that conveyed respect or defiance. For a human, everything was strange, unfamiliar, and difficult. He stumbled over syllables, fumbled with the delicate hand movements, and often misread her silent cues. Yet he persisted, rising again and again with patience that no Valari had ever shown her. Liara's initial frustration began to soften as she observed him. He was clumsy, undeniably human, but he never gave up. When he fell, he did not sulk. When he made mistakes, he did not hide. Instead, he laughed softly at himself, apologized sincerely, and tried again. His determination was a quiet fire that burned steadily, and Liara could not help but notice it. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the translucent ceilings, Liara guided Ethan through the proper ceremonial bow. His knees bent unevenly, his back stiff, and his hands trembled. Again, she instructed firmly, though the sharp edge in her voice had softened. "I'll get it," Ethan said, brushing dust from his uniform, a small grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I won't give up, Princess." There was something in the simplicity of his promise that struck her deeply. No alien could have shown such sincerity. Liara's pulse quickened as she watched him rise once more, kneel, and finally execute the bow nearly perfectly. For a brief moment she caught herself smiling, a genuine smile before quickly regaining her composure. Days turned into weeks, and the lessons grew longer and more complex. Liara taught him the ceremonial dances, intricate movements that symbolized loyalty, respect, and balance. Ethan faltered, of course. His human body was not built for the fluidity of Valari motion, but he refused to surrender. He practiced late into the night, often collapsing in exhaustion, yet always with a determined glint in his eyes when he returned the next day. One evening, while the suns dipped low and painted the palace gardens in orange and pink, Ethan hesitated mid-step during a complicated dance. His human limbs trembled with fatigue. Liara paused beside him, her hand hovering over his arm to steady him, and said softly, "You are stronger than you know. You only doubt it because you compare yourself to us." Ethan looked at her, his breath heavy. "I am human," he admitted. "I will never be like you, or like your people. But I want to be worthy. Worthy of you, Princess Liara." Liara's heart ached at the honesty in his words. For centuries her people had prized perfection and power. But here was a human, imperfect in every way, yet unafraid to offer his loyalty and courage. She had been trained to think humans weak, fragile, and unworthy, but Ethan was proving her wrong, not with strength or skill, but with heart. They continued in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle wind rustling through the flowers. Liara realized that she looked forward to these moments more than she had expected. She found herself noticing his determination, the curve of his smile when he succeeded, the earnestness in his eyes when he asked for guidance. Over time, the lessons became less about correction and more about collaboration. Liara discovered she enjoyed teaching him, and Ethan discovered he enjoyed learning from her. They laughed at mistakes, shared quiet moments of frustration, and slowly, a bond began to form, one built not on duty, but on mutual respect and understanding. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Ethan sank onto the marble floor, exhausted. "Princess, I don't know if I can ever get everything right," he said, his voice soft and vulnerable. Liara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It is not about perfection," she whispered. "It is about persistence, honesty, and courage. You have all of that, Ethan, more than you realize." For the first time, Ethan smiled without hesitation, and Liara found herself smiling back. A quiet warmth settled between them, growing stronger with each lesson, each shared laugh, and each moment of trust. Liara knew that the council had arranged this marriage for duty, for politics, for tradition. But here, in these small private moments, she felt something else taking root, something that might change everything. A human, fragile and imperfect, had begun to touch her heart in ways no Valari ever could. And for the first time, Princess Liara wondered if perhaps this human was not just her duty, but her choice. The peace of the Valari palace was shattered one morning when alarms blared through the crystalline towers. Dark ships from a rival alien fleet had appeared near the outer orbit, moving faster than Valari sensors could easily track. Panic rippled through the court. The elders ordered immediate lockdowns. Soldiers scrambled to their stations, and the princess was hurried away by her attendants. Liara's heart pounded, not only from fear for herself, but from the thought of Ethan. Ethan stood tall, despite the chaos around him. His human frame was small compared to the towering Valari guards, yet he did not flinch. "Where is she?" he demanded, his green eyes sharp with concern. When told that the princess was being moved to safety, he shook his head. "No, I came here to protect her. I will not hide while she faces danger alone." Liara, observing from a distant balcony, was stunned. Humans were fragile, and yet here was one willing to defy orders, to place himself directly in harm's way. Her heart, which had been quietly warming toward him, now ached with worry and admiration. How could someone so small stand so tall against overwhelming odds? The battle began with a flash of light. The enemy ships fired energy beams that tore through the outer defenses. The palace shook as alarms screamed. Valari soldiers engaged the attackers, their energy weapons cutting through the dark void with precision. Liara watched from her balcony, fear knotting her stomach. But she also saw Ethan moving toward the danger, his determination clear. He dodged debris, helped a fallen guard, and even managed to shut down a security breach, his human ingenuity proving invaluable. The enemy breached the palace gates, and Liara was cornered in a collapsing corridor. A heavy beam fell, crashing toward her. Time slowed as she realized she could not move fast enough. Then a human hand, strong and steady, pushed her out of harm's way. Ethan had reached her just in time, shielding her with his own body as the beam struck the ground beside them. Dust and sparks filled the air, and Liara's heart nearly stopped. She stared at him, breathless. "Ethan," she whispered, unable to form the words for what she felt. Fear, gratitude, awe. They all collided inside her. He looked at her with a mixture of relief and determination. "You were promised to me, Princess. But I do not stand here because of law or duty," he said, his voice low and steady. "I stand here because you matter to me. Always." Tears pricked Liara's eyes. She had been trained to admire strength, skill, and perfection. Yet here was a human, who by all logic should have been too weak to survive, standing before her as her protector. His courage, his willingness to risk everything for her, had broken through the walls of tradition and expectation she had built around her heart. The battle raged on outside, but in that moment, time seemed to freeze. Liara realized that she had underestimated humanity, not just Ethan, but all humans. Their strength was not measured in energy control or perfect skill, but in heart, loyalty, and the unyielding courage to stand for what they believed was right. When the attackers were finally repelled, the palace in ruins but the Villari people safe, Liara and Ethan stood together in the garden, the sun rising over a battered but still standing city. Guards and nobles whispered in awe, noting how the human had not only survived but had helped turn the tide. Liara, however, only had eyes for him. "You risked everything for me," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can ever repay you." Ethan shook his head, a small, tired smile on his face. "You don't have to. That's not why I did it. I did it because you're worth it. You matter to me, Princess Liara. Always." In that moment, Liara understood something she had never realized before. Duty, promises, and tradition were important, but they were nothing compared to the courage of the heart. And the human who had been promised to her by law had proven, without question, that he was worthy of her respect, her trust, and perhaps her love. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting light on the shattered palace, Liara made a silent vow to herself. She would no longer see Ethan as a mere obligation. He had shown her the true meaning of bravery, and in her heart she knew their bond had become more than duty. It had become something real, something powerful, and something that might change both their worlds forever. After the battle, the Villari palace slowly began to recover. Guards repaired broken walls, servants cleaned up the debris, and the council convened to discuss the aftermath. But for Princess Liara, the world felt different. The human, Ethan, who had once seemed fragile and out of place, now stood as someone she could not ignore. He had proven his courage, his loyalty, and his heart, and in doing so, he had captured her attention in a way no Villari ever had. Liara walked through the quiet palace gardens that evening, the twin moons casting silver light across the shimmering pathways. She thought of Ethan, his unwavering determination, the way he had risked himself to save her, his honesty and kindness. Every memory of him brought a mix of warmth and fear. She had been trained all her life to follow duty, to marry as tradition dictated, to honor promises written centuries before her birth. But her heart now whispered a different path, one that called her to choose not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Ethan found her there, sitting on a low marble bench beneath the glowing flowers. He looked tired but calm, his green eyes filled with concern as he approached. "Princess Liara," he said softly, "are you all right?" Liara looked at him, and for a moment words failed her. She had rehearsed her thoughts 1,000 times in her mind, but now, faced with him, she struggled to speak. I need to talk to you," she finally whispered. They walked together through the gardens, the air heavy with the scent of alien blossoms, and the quiet hum of energy from the palace. Liara's mind raced. She had always imagined this moment differently, expecting to feel fear, duty, or resignation. But instead she felt something entirely new: hope, curiosity, and a deep, undeniable connection. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I thought I would resent you. I thought this marriage would be a duty I could never accept. But now," she paused, struggling to find the words, "now I see you, not as my obligation, not as a representative of your species, but as yourself, and I cannot ignore what I feel." Ethan stopped walking and turned to her, his expression both hopeful and cautious. "Liara, are you saying—" "Yes," she said, her voice steadying. "I choose you. Not because it is required, not because the council demands it, but because I want you. I want to stand beside you, to trust you, and to love you." Tears filled Ethan's eyes, and a smile broke across his face, radiant and full of relief. "Princess." He reached for her hands, holding them gently. "You have no idea how long I've hoped to hear those words." Liara looked into his eyes, seeing truth, courage, and devotion reflected there. She realized that all her training, all her life of rules and expectations had prepared her for many things, but never for the feeling that overwhelmed her now. She did not fear vulnerability, nor did she hide behind tradition. She allowed herself to trust, to care, and to choose. The palace, with all its grandeur and expectation, seemed to fade away. For the first time, Liara felt free. She was no longer a princess bound by promises she did not understand. She was a woman choosing a human, a fragile but steadfast soul who had proven his worth in courage, loyalty, and love. Ethan pulled her into an embrace, careful and reverent, as if holding something fragile and precious. Liara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment she understood that love was not perfection. Love was courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand together even when the world seemed against them. The moons rose higher in the sky, bathing the gardens in soft silver light. Liara whispered softly, "I am yours, Ethan. Not because I am promised, but because I choose you." He held her tighter, his own voice low and full of emotion. "And I am yours, Liara, always." In the quiet night, the human and the princess stood together, two very different beings bound by choice, trust, and heart. The council may have arranged their marriage for tradition. The stars may have predicted their union, but it was neither duty nor destiny that had brought them together. It was their courage to see each other clearly, to accept each other fully, and to love with honesty that had forged the bond between them. And in that moment, Princess Liara realized that sometimes the greatest power lay not in law or tradition, but in the strength to choose love, freely, boldly, and without regret. The grand hall of the Valari Palace gleamed brighter than ever, adorned with shimmering lanterns, floating crystal petals, and banners that told the story of generations. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day the ancient promise would be fulfilled. But unlike centuries before, this union was not just a matter of duty or politics. Today, it was a choice made with courage, honesty, and love. Princess Liara walked through the hall, her gown flowing like liquid light. Her heart beat steadily, yet with a rhythm she could feel in her chest, an unfamiliar combination of anticipation, excitement, and calm. At her side stood Ethan, the human who had once seemed fragile and out of place, now standing tall with quiet confidence. He had learned the ways of the Valari, not perfectly, but with devotion that shone brighter than any alien skill. Every misstep, every stumble, every moment of determination had brought them to this day. The council and nobles gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity, awe, and cautious respect. For the first time they saw a human not as weak or inferior, but as someone who had proven his courage and heart beyond measure. Ethan's presence had challenged centuries of prejudice, and the whispers among the elders now carried admiration. Liara approached the ceremonial platform, her eyes meeting Ethan's. She saw the same determination, the same honesty, and the same love reflected in his gaze. For a moment she remembered the first day she had seen him. Nervous, awkward, unsure, and now he was here, unwavering and steadfast, ready to become her partner not by law but by choice. The ceremony began, and Ethan followed the ancient rituals with care, his movements thoughtful, his words deliberate. He was not perfect, but he was genuine, and that sincerity touched the hearts of everyone present. Liara felt the warmth of his hand as they stood together, and she knew that this was more than tradition. It was the beginning of something extraordinary.